Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out tonight for the new elementary school community forum. We've got a wonderful audience. We've got another 14 or 15 people online last time I checked, and a bunch more registered. This is a hybrid Zoom and in-person presentation. We're going to start it in a few minutes, but before we do, I'm going to give you a couple of housekeeping items that we have to take care of. From the team that's presenting, so anybody who hasn't heard before on my team, they need to present from the microphone. So the microphone is a live feed to the TV studio. It is being recorded by SMAC for viewing later. And for people in the audience coming to ask questions, we have a microphone at the front of this aisle. We ask that when it's time to ask questions, you come down to the microphone to ask your questions and identify yourself. So this meeting's being recorded by SMAC. It'll be played on the usual televised cable channels. It'll also be available on demand. There's going to be a link with the presentation slides on the school website. There's a website on stoughtonschools.org. Our website is stoughtonschools.org, and there's a link to the new elementary school building project. And you're going to find all sorts of pertinent information there. There's a great frequently asked questions section. There's past presentations, agendas and minutes from all of our building committee meetings, and all of the project documents. The Zoom participants who have questions, we ask that you could type your questions into either the Q&A box or into the chat box. Jeff Pickett will be monitoring them, and he will in fact present them to the speakers as questions. So please feel free to type in your questions. We really appreciate everybody taking the time out from your busy schedule to be here with us tonight, so thank you.
Thank you all for coming. My name is TJ Recupero. I have the pleasure of working with the South School Building Committee. The purpose of tonight is, this is one of several forums that we've had, but we're coming up to a point where we have to do a substantial filing with MSBA. School committee particularly has to make some pretty important decisions for the project going forward. So our role is to give the community at large a briefing. You'll hear more about the decisions that have to be made, but my purpose is really to just, I'm the pretty face. So with us today is Carl Franceschi and Courtney Southwick, somewhere here from DRA, the architects for the project. They also built this wonderful school, designed it and oversaw building, as well as Vertex, which was formerly Compass Project Management. Chin Lin is here somewhere, and Tim Bonfatti. Tim, you might recognize also the owner's project manager on this project. And I think we picked this team in large part because of the success they had here. So I guess if I can take just a minute to bring us up to speed and then pass off to the people who have more important things to say. Building committee's role isn't to make any decisions outside of recommending to the policymakers for this town. So we're presenting to you our findings over the last year. Actually, more than a year we've been involved, but in the last year we've been in the feasibility study phase of the MSBA process, where we have to study all options for, no worries. I'm going to pass off in a second anyway. We have to study all options to resolve what the school facilities master plan study has identified as a problem, specifically here, a deficient South School building. We have to study a base repair. We have to study an addition renovation. We have to study a new construction in all its phases. We have to study new locations. We have to study utilities, roadway networks. There's an educational plan that our two principals, Katie Monahan and Jake Dorr of the Wilkins and South respectively, put together. Magnificent product. I don't have a vast amount of experience, but I do know what the people who do have experience have told me. It was wonderful, and I'm very proud of their work and very proud to serve on the committee with them. So for present purposes, we have to decide whether or not, or actually the school committee has to decide, but we recommend to them what form and shape the school will take to meet our educational plan, and one of those decisions is whether or not to consolidate two schools or whether just to replace the South School. The MSBA has put in its charge to us that we have to study both options. So this forum is particularly to outline those issues and what we've looked at, and to seek any input from the community to what the community wants to see. And I might add, I see Mr. DeFelice here, not to call you out, Ed, but you and I had tons of discussions when the high school project came about how we pay for it. And that is certainly something that we will study here and have to. So any questions you have, particularly, as I said, we're here to brief the community on consolidations, but any questions you have, we certainly endeavor to answer them all. And the committee, as the high school committee was also, will always be open to any communication, comment, questions, and otherwise. We hope this is a transparent process, and please don't hesitate to reach out. At that, if I can pass off to Carl Franceschi of DRA.
Actually, Catherine Weiss from the school committee is going to talk about the consolidation. Oops. Sorry. And just to point out that we do have a submission coming up at the end of August. That's why we're using this valuable time in the summer to have one of these community meetings. But we'll move on to the issue at hand about whether Stoughton should consolidate from 5 schools to 4 elementary schools.
Thank you. Good evening. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Catherine Weiss. I'm the chair of the school committee, and I also serve on the building committee. The question before the school committee this summer is, do we choose what's called a 225 enrollment, meaning a simple replacement of the South Elementary School for the building meant to hold about 300 students, or do we opt for the 515 enrollment, which would mean a consolidation from 5 to 4 elementary schools in Stoughton with a building meant to hold around 600 students? The school committee is going to vote on this next Wednesday, July 26th at 7 p.m. That meeting will be in the school committee conference room at the district offices on Pierce Street. It will also be broadcast on SMAC. These maps represent the current elementary schools. The one on your left, my right, is, I want to point out, the South District is the one in green, and the Wilkins is the one on the upper middle in blue. The Wilkins is the school that we are intending to repurpose if we do choose the consolidation option. The one on this side, your right, my left, shows the population density of Stoughton. This is kind of like a heat map. The darker the red, the more dense the population of elementary-aged children. And the black lines on top superimpose the current districts. Either enrollment choice, choosing to simply replace the South School or consolidating, means that we will need to redistrict. With the smaller option, the redistricting will simply be straightening up some lines. It will be much smaller. However, if we do choose to go to 4 elementary schools, that will require redrawing the map. During the feasibility study, we've been talking with Cropper GIS. They're one of the top independent consultants in redistricting for the nation. They gave us several options by looking at how we would use the schools, making sure that we balance the populations among the elementary schools. They looked at all sorts of demographic factors. They gave us 2 preliminary draft options, which they were able to kind of refine into 4. We're not deciding on the exact redistricting at this time. That would be something that would happen right before the school would open. But we did learn that it is possible to redistrict Stoughton into 4 districts and do it in a very thoughtful way to address some of the issues that we see in the school district. When we think about the 225 enrollment option, which would be the simple one-to-one replacement of the South Elementary School, one of the major advantages would obviously be a smaller school means less construction costs. It would be a lower initial cost to the town. Compared to building the larger elementary school, most of the students would stay in their current districts, and we would keep the small neighborhood schools that Stoughton values so much. On the other hand, if we simply replace the South Elementary School, that would eventually cost the town more. By replacing this individual school, after we do the middle school, which is the next one on the agenda, we have not forgotten the middle school, we would then have to replace the Wilkins and the Jones schools, and then further down the line, we would be looking at replacing the Hanson, the Daw, and the Gibbons. That's a lot to ask of this town to replace all of those buildings. The single school replacement would also be more expensive per student. We would be building a gym, a cafetorium, a kitchen, all of these communal spaces, but for a much smaller population than we would be if we were building them for a larger school. The smaller school would also make it harder for us to share some of the resources across the districts. Currently, a lot of the special teachers, the music, art, gym teachers travel from school to school. If we have this smaller school, they would continue to do so rather than being based in one single school. Same for some of the therapists, the speech therapists, for example, need to travel between multiple schools. In comparison, if we look at the 515 enrollment, again, this is the enrollment that would have the consolidation from 5 to 4 elementary schools. There would be some advantages. We would be kind of maximize the amount of money that we would be putting into the school, including the state reimbursement for the building project. Again, because we would be having a larger population use the same spaces, we would be eventually paying less for furnishing a kitchen, equipping a gym, that sort of thing, because it would be used by more students. The larger school would be more energy efficient and more flexible. That would allow us to absorb some of the population bubbles that occasionally come through. You know, one year it seems like everyone's kid is in kindergarten, and the next year there's crickets, there's very few kids. We would be able to absorb that more with this larger school that had maybe 5 classrooms as opposed to 2 classrooms per grade. More students across the district would benefit from this larger school. There would be more students attending a new, bigger school, but also we would be able to extend benefits to other students across the district. Right now, the South and the Wilkins have undersized learning commons and gyms. The Wilkins doesn't have space for full school assemblies. Many of those students from the Wilkins schools would likely be redistricted to places like the Daw and the Gibbons, which have much larger shared spaces and larger classrooms. So those students would reap some benefit even if they weren't at the new school. Additionally, this larger redistricting would allow us to better address pockets of overcrowding. At the South School, we're currently bursting at the seams. The Hanson is also pushing up against the limits of how many students we can put in that building. And so this would allow us to kind of address that. That allows for more ideal class sizes across the district. Stoughton prizes the smaller class sizes that we have, and this would allow us to keep those. It would allow for better resource sharing, and we are looking at improving the other 3 schools. Right now, there's a new playground going to be put in for the Hanson. The Daw and the Gibbons are getting more secure double vestibule entries, and we'll be keeping those in mind in an attempt to make sure that the school facilities are more equal across the student population. This new larger school can also better host events like professional development for educators, after school and summer programs, community sporting events, all sorts of activities like that. Some cons are it will be more expensive to build this larger school, especially initially, and that's something that we don't take lightly. On the flip side, this would mean reduced cost of the town long term, because we would be taking some of our more expensive schools like the current South School and Jones School offline, and we would be cutting down the number of buildings that we would be renovating or replacing. More students, probably about 35 to 40% of the population, would be affected by the redistricting if we consolidated from 5 to 4 schools. On a personal note, one of my kids will be in 5th grade when this new school opens. He might be affected by this, and so I certainly take that into consideration. We're very mindful of the concerns and issues that come from having students move schools during their elementary school career. And also, the larger school would kind of do away with some of the neighborhood schools that the Stoughton has valued so much. This would remain a K through 5 school. We're not going to what a number of towns are doing, which is the humongous K through 2 schools. So it would still be a K through 5 school. And we've been mindful of that. We've asked the design team to use the architecture to create a sense of community in this larger school plan. And I think you'll see that we have a plan that would accomplish that. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to the design team.
Thanks, Catherine. Again, I'm Carl Franceschi with DRA Architects. And before we get to your input on what Catherine was just talking about, we did want to share with you where the design is at for this project. We do recognize, by the way, that with the proposed preferred option here of new construction on the Line lumber site, the town will be dealing with some issues of the vacated buildings. There is some time to decide on how those are reconfigured or repurposed, but we do recognize that a new school on the Line lumber site frees up the South Elementary School parcel. The Wilkins can be repurposed perhaps as a preschool program. That's being discussed right now. And then the Jones likely, again, would free up some space there, and the town would have some options as to what to do with that property. As was mentioned by TJ, we in the building committee did consider a number of options for this project before settling on a preferred design option just recently, actually, in the last couple of weeks. And that included 2 different enrollment options as well as 4 or 5 different design options, including renovating and adding on to the existing South School, to a number of options, the one shown to the right there, for the Line lumber site, which is a piece of property, if you're not familiar with it, that the town does own. They acquired this property back in 1960s for school purposes. So the town forefathers had foresight back then that someday additional property might be needed, and in the end, that's the option that rose to the top, was building a new school on the Line lumber site, which has access from Park Street. From a cost point of view, for these various options, they were all sort of on the same order of magnitude. So it really came down to which options best fit the educational program. And the one that rose to the top, as we said, is what we refer to as the pinwheel design, because of the wings of the building are sort of physical embodiments of the educational program, which suggested having dedicated classroom neighborhoods, so to speak, for each grade. So because it's a K through 5 school, there are 6 grades, there are 6 wings. So each grade is kind of a smaller learning community unto itself, with not only classrooms, but special ed rooms, small group rooms, some extended learning areas, access to a teacher's rooms, their own individual boys and girls rooms. So it's very nicely scaled for each grade, and the same design configuration would work whether it was the smaller enrollment or the larger enrollment. Simply the size of those wings would be adjusted. And so that's what we're moving forward with from a design point of view. As you heard Catherine say, though, the school committee has to make the final decision on the size of the target enrollment here. But we did want to share with you, the cost to date as we've. This is order of magnitude only, where we don't have much detail in the design yet. It's what we would call conceptual design, but we do recognize that right now the project cost for the smaller building is somewhere in the vicinity of $65 to $70 million. The one for the larger building is somewhere in the vicinity of $85 to $90 million. But and that's the total project cost prior to reimbursement by the state school building authority. It's really in the next phase of this, this coming fall, that we would work on getting more specific numbers here, both the total project cost numbers and what the grant would be from the state school building authority. And just quickly, here's the floor plans for the building. It is proposed to be a 3-story building with those classroom wings there shown on kind of the north and west side of the plan, so to speak, where each of those wings is a grade of the school, and so it stacks up on 3 floors, and it's kind of nicely organized so that the kindergarten and first grade is on the first floor, then second and third, then fourth and fifth. So it's almost, metaphorically, as you advance through school, you rise up in the building with the shared functions in the center of it. So the learning commons is in the center of these wings, immediately adjacent to the entrance, with a stair and elevator there, and there's stairs in each of the classroom neighborhoods as well. And the public areas, so to speak, the cafetorium and the gymnasium are in the wings to the south there. So they could be open after hours if there's an evening event, and the rest of the school nicely closed off. So it lays out well. It really is kind of, as we said, kind of the physical translation of the educational program that the principals and the school committee endorsed, and that has been submitted to the state previously. Here's what a very preliminary 3-dimensional sort of massing model of the building would look like, with the courtyard entrance to the bottom of the slide there, and then you can see the classroom wings. That triangular area between the 2 rows of classrooms is not just a corridor, it's actually a sort of extended learning space too, where it can be developed in ways, and we'll show some photographs of this, so that we get double use out of it. We get multiple use. Likewise, the center of the building, the learning commons, even though the square footage of it is a smaller defined area, because it's adjacent to that central area, it can expand, and we're getting multiple use out of the same square footage. So it's a very efficient, flexible space in that regard. And then we've just put together a couple precedent photos. These aren't really renderings of the proposed school. These are other, obviously, constructed buildings that have kind of similar design patterns and ideas. And that's Central Commons, for instance. There could be, some people call it a learning stair or a stadium stair, where in addition to being a functional stair to get from first to second floor, there's also seating there in informal kind of gathering spot. Likewise, that space in the classroom wings is like the image on the right there, where there are classrooms that open onto this. It does function as the corridor, but it also could have some comfortable seating or some instructional marker boards and so forth there that allow it to be extended learning space for collaboration, for work outside of the classroom, but still being supervised by the adjacent teachers. Somewhat like the view on the left there. We also envision that there needs to be smaller scaled spaces within the classrooms, spaces, more spatial variety, so that we can accommodate a lot of different activities that happen in classrooms these days. Here's another sample of what one of those, we call them breakout areas, where you break out of the classroom into that open space could be. Again, it's a way of kind of extending the allowable square footage that the state provides for these kinds of projects and getting multiple use out of them. Again, the sort of common space, the cafeteria with a stage, which would allow for performances, obviously, as well as being the dining space. Again, a multi-purpose space. The flexibility is one of the guiding principles in the design here. And here's, again, a conceptual site plan at this point in time of the Line lumber site with the new school on it. A couple things to point out here. The property does have frontage on Park Street. There is already a curb cut there in an old railroad right-of-way. It's labeled Fano Drive on some plans. It's not officially a town-owned street, but it certainly could act as that, obviously, in our development here and become the main driveway into and out of the site. The building and the parking is fairly compact in terms of the way it uses the site, and so there is actually a good portion, some 6 to 7 acres of that site, which is undeveloped, is not necessary for the new elementary school and could be reserved for future development, while still this site plan provides adequate playground space, both immediately adjacent to the buildings in those various little courtyard areas, and green athletic fields too, which could serve not just the school but the community, sort of conveniently located adjacent to parking. One of the other advantages of this site is the separation of buses and cars, and the long queuing area that can be provided for cars as well. For those who know the South School these days, at pickup time, it's pretty chaotic there. There is certainly not enough, queuing area for cars or enough parking either. That's one of the drawbacks of so-called neighborhood schools. They were back in a time where many more children walked to school, and not as many were getting dropped off. That certainly has changed over the years, and we need to make allowance for that. This site plan can do that. And just to zoom in a little bit so you can see a little bit better, as we said, there's a separate parent drop-off loop, there's a separate bus drop-off loop, both kind of accessing the front of the building. There's a main entrance immediately adjacent to the administration. There's also the possibility of having direct access to the kindergarten rooms, which are in front here and have their own dedicated play space. And then, as we said, between the classroom wings, there's opportunity for outdoor classrooms, outdoor play space, an amphitheater, and then off of the cafeteria or the gym at this end of the building, there's opportunity for paved play at recess time, so forth. And there's a fire lane around the building for good security access. And these long driveways can also double as parallel parking for those, once or twice a year events where, in a large number of vehicles show up all at once. But the day-to-day parking for teachers and staff and parents dropping off can be accommodated in the striped parking lots there. And here, again, just to sort of put it in context, it is a wooded site. There is that railroad right-of-way that runs sort of diagonally through the view right off of Park Street here. There are some wetlands, around the site, but this portion of the site is certainly buildable. And then there's a good portion of buildable land that is left undeveloped, and the building sits close to the entrance points there. And then just a couple of other kind of precedent photos for what could happen outside in these spaces, which is, again, one of the guiding principles was that we did want to, one thing we've learned from the pandemic is, how much schools take advantage of outdoor space for a variety of reasons. And this kind of plan really lends itself to that for both play space and for outdoor learning space. So there could be, areas like this. And that all of them would be fully accessible, even though, there is some terrain on the site. It's not flat, but we can terrace the site. We can put in ramps and a mixture of stairs and so forth to accommodate. And we can preserve a lot of trees in close proximity to the building as well to make that part of the learning environment too. This is one of the pocket parks that is right outside here on Pearl Street, behind the bleachers. That was done by our landscape architect, and it's kind of an inspiration to how we can treat small spaces and make them opportunities and not just leftover spaces. Likewise, other schools too that we will visit with the building committee and with the school administration to share some ideas of how to deal with these outdoor spaces in close proximity to elementary schools. So one of the other opportunities that Catherine mentioned about a new school in this kind of context these days, obviously it's going to be a very sustainable building. It is a requirement of the State School Building Authority that all new schools be quote-unquote green schools, but we can also take it well beyond that too, which not only is healthful and economical for Stoughton in the long run, but it actually does get you more reimbursement initially too with their grant, that if we exceed the very basic level of energy efficiency and environmental impact, the community can get up to 3 or 4 more reimbursement points from the state when that grant is being calculated. So we will be certainly paying attention to that as we move forward. Things like solar panels on the roof, the way the building steps, we have actually opportunities to have rooftop areas that can be a garden, it could be a patio off of the third floor, for instance. So it's not literally going up on the roof of the highest building, but it's available there. We could have student gardens. We have this proximity to the wooded areas, things like that we can incorporate in the building. So there's a lot of potential on that site. And then just to, again, reiterate where we're at in this and the important decisions coming up in the big picture. As we said, the building committee has expressed their preference for this design of the options we've studied. It's up to the school committee next week to decide on the size of the building with your input tonight as well. And then the design team, the project team, will put together a submission in the month of October that goes to the State School Building Authority with that so-called preferred option for Stoughton. And once that is approved, we move into the next phase of the project, which is called schematic design. We would add a lot more detail to the plans, the dimensions, details, specifications, and so forth, so that our cost estimators, and we'd have at least 2 independent cost estimators, develop a much more robust cost estimate for this project, including the site design, including furnishings and equipment and so forth, so that we could bring it to the town in the spring as part of first town meeting, and then there might be an override next spring, in the spring of 2024 at that point. And that would be the decision point for the townwide votes, and after that we would develop the documents for construction, so-called construction documents, to be able to go out to bidding and start construction basically a year later in the summer of 2025. And we'd estimate it would take about 1.5 years, 2 years to construct the school and occupy it. So we show the fall of 2027 as to when it could be occupied. So that's the big picture. And we certainly appreciate you coming out tonight, and we are interested to hear both from the folks here in the audience and the folks at home. If you have questions, we've got a team here to answer between our team at DRA, the owners project managers, the education team of the principals here in the school committee. So feel free. We do have a microphone. I guess we need to use the microphone for people at home to hear. Is that right, Joyce?
That is correct. Oh. And I have a microphone back here that has a bit of a static buzz, but for those people where it's not accessible, I can share the mic.
Okay. So are there questions, I guess, first here, and then we'll take the ones from home? Yes, ma'am. I guess, is this mic on? Can you turn it on, Courtney? Just so the people in the house can hear it and at home. Thank you. Not yet.
It's on. What's happening?
Yeah.
It's going in and out. Sorry, we might need to get a new mic. Yeah? Oh. No, we're going to turn this one off.
Turn that one off there.
Try another one. Hello.
There we go.
My name is Debbie Levitz. I think, having looked around the room, that I have the longest experience with the Stoughton Public Schools, 18 as a teacher and 20 as a principal. According to the very fancy postcard we got in the mail, you won't finish your construction of the South School until 4 years from this fall. That's what it says.
Yes.
So that means the students at the South School are going to have to stand out on the street for those 4 years for their education. I don't understand. Consolidation it involves more than those students, as I understand. I am very supportive of neighborhood schools. I am not supportive of children being bused out of their district, and I don't think that serves students or parents any good. Parents who are in the neighborhood are more likely to participate in the school and volunteer in that school rather than moving across town to be involved. My look at the population of the elementary schools currently was 1,600. You go down to 4 schools, you're going to be at 400, which is very large for an elementary school. And I'm very concerned, as I say, that students of the South School have nowhere to go until you finish your construction. Do you have an answer for that?
Yeah, there's a couple different parts there. Oh, okay. There are a couple of questions there. One is, what do the South students do in the interim here until a new school is brought online? The existing school would continue to operate with its current enrollment in the same fashion that it is today until the new school is built. This proposal is to build a new South School on a separate site. That construction would happen, while the existing school stays in operation. Does that answer one of your questions, Debbie?
The current South School is not in a physical state that is safe. That's been true for some time.
Well, it's certainly why it's at the top of the list to be replaced. I don't know that we'd call it unsafe. It's not the best physical environment, compared to today's modern schools. That's why we're replacing it. But I don't think it's appropriate to call it unsafe. There are, handicap ramps in there that are steeper than today's code, for instance. There are classrooms that are a bit smaller than today's standards. There are some spaces that are lacking for teacher planning and so forth. But the basic classrooms do have natural light. They are reasonably sized. So the basic, structure of the building is adequate for now. But clearly, it is the most needy building in the system.
You never mentioned the Wilkins School either, because you're not doing any work there. Is that correct?
Not as part of this project, but the idea would be if the school department agreed to relocate and expand the preschool program to that building, some work would be done on that building. Windows have recently been replaced, but there'd be additional work that would be considered to upgrade it for the expanded and relocated preschool program.
So the school committee is considering, I know you're not on the school committee, the school committee is considering changing schools which are, 2 are in the 200s and the other 3 are in the 300s, to 4 schools in the 400s. And they see that as a benefit to students.
The math isn't quite that simple because the new school would be larger than the average size. The other schools, the Daw and the Gibbon and the Hanson, would remain their same size. In fact, they would get a little bit of breathing room because the new school would take on a few of the district-wide special ed spaces that could be pulled out of those schools to free up some space in those existing schools. But they wouldn't change their enrollment necessarily. The new school would be a bit larger and the others would continue at their current size. But we should mention too, that there were a couple other parts to your question. And one was about the size of the school. I understand you prefer neighborhood schools. We understand that. But in a quick study of schools in Massachusetts in the last, I think it was 4 years that we looked at, some 50 or 60 new elementary schools have been constructed. The average size of those schools is 600 students. So even at the larger school here, we're below the average size. And if we were to build the smaller school, the 225, that would be the smallest school approved by the state in the last 4 years. Not that that makes it wrong in and of itself, but just to give some context, that these days for a number of reasons, some of which Catherine talked about in the pros and cons. More districts are choosing to build slightly larger schools than previous neighborhood schools. And it's true, children used to walk to school more, and those schools...
Several of those are K-8, not K-5.
I'm sorry?
Several of those are K-8, not K-5.
We only looked at K-5 schools in that comparison, but I understand. The other point that you made was about busing students, and I just want to clear up, it's good that you brought that up, because the consolidation is not literally to take the Wilkins students and bus them to the South District. The consolidation would involve redistricting the entire town. So the South School would still attract students, in the closest geographic proximity to itself, and what's now the Wilkins District would be reallocated, accordingly. Some would go to Daw, some would go to Hanson, some would go to Gibbons. Some would go to South, actually. So those lines have not yet been determined, but it's clear that the redistricting would involve the entire town.
I thought the meeting tonight was about consolidation. I didn't realize it was a presentation about the building of the new South School. That's my fault. But I am opposed to anything which changes the neighborhood structure of the Stoughton schools. We've always been very proud of that. And the gentlemen that I joined when I became principal of the Wilkins had all been 30-year tenure in their schools. And they were very proud of what they had accomplished as neighborhood schools, especially for parent involvement. It makes a big difference for students feeling like, they want to attend that school, and they are more motivated to learning than if they're out of district.
We agree, and one of the principles that was mentioned in the education plan was to make the new school a community resource so that it would welcome parents and families into the building, so that hopefully the new school continues that tradition of involving parents and becoming a resource for the entire town, not just the South District.
It's not going to happen if their children are at a distance from their neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you for your input.
I don't know how to put that back. Thank you.
You could just give her the mic, Courtney.
Oh, sorry, that was
You can go first.
Hi, my name is Joanne Cull. I'm a resident in the town. I no longer have children in the school system, yet I care very much what's going to happen in this town. My question is, if this new school is constructed and the town overall ends up with total redistricting, what effect, if any, will that have by going down to 4 schools, but yet a larger school with the teacher-child ratio population in each classroom? What effect, if any, if we go, the whole town gets redistricted and we have a new school and it's a larger school, what effect, if any, will that have on the teacher-child ratio population in each classroom if we're consolidating?
Great question.
Yet building a bigger school, but consolidating.
The plan is that Stoughton would continue its very personalized and low student-to-teacher ratio in the future classrooms throughout the district. So, as was mentioned, so even though it's a slightly larger building with more students in it, the number of students in each classroom doesn't change. It's still a very advantageous number here in Stoughton, where it's something like 18 to 20 is the average, whereas in many other schools across the state, it's like 24 to 25 students in a classroom.
The people on the Zoom call can't hear the questions, so we're going to repeat them. And if anyone wants to answer them, we should probably answer them up here.
Where'd the mic go? There was a question here, right? Do you have the mic back there?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. First, In future programs, would you have your video on paper for those of us who are visually impaired? They did adjust the sound for me adequately, and the seating is not my favorite, but it's adequate. Since a lot of the people that are going to pay for this are disabled like myself, and many of them unable to get out of the house, I kind of feel like I represent them, and we should make these meetings as accessible as possible. I don't have a computer. I don't have SMAC. So I have to come. So making me physically comfortable and able to access the information is important. And I know it's not a contest, but I spent 42 years in the Stoughton school system.
Thank you.
I'm not a parent or a grandparent, but two of my great nieces go to the South School. I went to the South School. 3 generations of my family went to the South School. I went to the Wilkins. And you can tell by looking at me that that wasn't just yesterday. So I agree that the schools are old, but I don't know as they have to be replaced. And if they have to be replaced, I'm very reluctant to put elementary school children in a 3-story building. That smacks city. That doesn't smack suburbia. When the South School opened, it was a revelation because it was so different from the other elementary schools in town. And it had some flaws, but we grew to love it. To tell you how long ago that was, my teacher was Helen Hansen. Those were the good old days. If the school has to be replaced, I'd like something small. I really think if you're a little kid, having over 500 schoolmates is a little daunting. That's just me, and 30 years of teaching 5th graders. So I'd like something a little lower to the ground. School shouldn't be some sort of Olympic climbing contest. That's one thing I think many people have grown to love about the South School. It truly is a neighborhood school, and families know each other, and kids get to know each other. I don't know if you have over 500 schoolmates, if you get to know them. It just smacks more of high school. Even our middle school isn't 3 stories high, and I realize that's a personal prejudice of mine, but I really think that our schools should be more community spaces, and that they should, most of our housing in town isn't multi-story. It may be 2 stories, but it's not 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I think this school would be out of character with what we currently have. And I want the best for my little nieces, and I want them to be comfortable. And this space to me is too many and too much.
Well, we appreciate your opinions, actually held by many people who have that initial kind of reaction to a multi-story building, particularly coming from the South School, which it's a multi-level building, but it's basically a 1-story building on multiple levels. But we believe it still could have the feel and the character that's appropriate and scale with the children, in that, as we said, the youngest children, their entire environment is basically on 1 floor. The only space that they might go upstairs for is a maker space, maybe once or twice a week. Otherwise, all the common spaces are on the 1st floor. So the youngest children are on one level. And we have found that the primary reason, by the way, for stacking it is to make a compact building, to minimize the impact on the land and how much land it takes. It reduces the footprint of the building, so to speak. The only spaces on the upper floor are the classrooms for the 4th and 5th grade. There's no reason that any of the other students would really go to the 3rd floor. And we think by the time you're in 4th and 5th grade, you're healthy enough, and it's actually good for you from a health point of view to walk up 2 flights of stairs to get to the 3rd floor. There are many elementary schools around the state. We recognize, too, that this is kind of a school in the woods. It actually isn't in context with any other buildings. It's kind of onto itself there in the woods. And we think in that sense, it can stand, being a 3-story building and not feel out of character. But we do appreciate your thought. And
Well, I
as
have one
designers,
more.
we'd work hard to keep the scale appropriate for children.
One more comment. One of the things about the design of the present South School is the glass walls in the classrooms. And from a design point of view, a lot of glass looks nice. And solar energy and all that stuff. The problem was, on a sunny day, there was so much heat that we had to move our desks over toward the other wall. And I noticed what looked like the cafeteria and the auditorium had a glass wall. I hope that there's a consideration for blinds or shades or curtains, so that if you were going to put something up like this, that the room could be darkened adequately, and also so we don't actually kind of fry the kids. As a kind of light-skinned person, I spent a lot of time over on this other side of the wall. Gradually, they brought in shades and curtains, but I think on day one, whatever you can do to control the sun would be helpful to the children and to anyone who's trying to teach under those conditions.
Thank you. There's a concern about the amount of glass and windows for the folks at home, and we certainly understand that and appreciate that, and it's not only the glare and the overheating that is an issue, but energy use in general is an issue that we take very seriously in trying to be careful about how much glass there is in a building, because glass is not only more expensive than solid wall, but it's less energy efficient than solid wall too. So we're careful. Everyone loves having a lot of natural light in a building, but as you say, we don't want to overheat the building or have a lot of heat loss through the glass. And we want to be careful. The new energy code, actually, that's just been adopted this summer and will affect this building going forward, is very strict about how much glass can be in a building these days. So we share that. And the renderings are, as we say, conceptual at this point in time, and so showing a lot of glass at the entrance or at the cafeteria is more almost symbolic. It's not being literal at this point. So we will take that into account moving forward. Thank you.
So I'm going to give the microphone to one of the principals, because I think that they have a lot to contribute to the conversation about whether there'd be job loss with the consolidation and how the 3 stories work.
Joyce, I think they should come up here because Zoom people can't hear that much.
Sorry.
Is this better? Okay, hi, I'm Katie Monahan. I'm the principal of the Wilkins Elementary School. And first and foremost, I wanted to thank all of you for coming. I also live in Stoughton. My boys went to the South School, and as I just said, I'm currently the principal of the Wilkins. So there's a lot of personal passion that I have put into this project, and I hope that at least when I am speaking and then when my colleague, Mr. Dorr, speak, we can impart some of that passion into you. I know that there's a question about job loss and what will happen with the staff, and that is a legitimate concern when you hear about going to a consolidation where you're changing the way a building will be used in a town. So I appreciate that concern. I would like to assure you that when we designed the educational plan, both Mr. Dorr and I took all of the staffing considerations from both buildings into consideration when we planned what this new building would look like and how it would operate, and then therefore how it would serve the students going forward. Because the building would be larger It would be servicing, it could service up to 600 students. There would absolutely be a need for all of the teachers from the Wilkins to join those at the South School, and therefore there would be no reason to think that anyone would be losing their job. Additionally, right now, both Mr. Dorr and I do not have certain staff that are full-time. Our two positions, for example, one of the specials, say art, they're part-time positions in both schools. We would make that a full-time position, so again, there would be no job loss. And I do know that that is definitely something that's very concerning when you hear about closing a building, what's going to happen to the teachers there. I'm extremely passionate about protecting my staff and making sure that they're okay. And when we thought about the plan, we did think long and hard, not only about what would be fantastic and beneficial for the students in Stoughton, but also how our staff that we both had would both fit into that plan.
Hi, my name is Jake Dorr. I'm the principal at the South School. So I think something to keep in mind when you're looking at the potential for consolidation, and when we looked at this, so we were the authors of roughly, it's like 85 pages. It's like an 85-page educational plan, which is available on the website, that kind of goes through every element that was considered when developing this plan for the school by DRA. And so a piece of that, it was a really nice opportunity to take what the schools currently have and then fill in the gaps where things were needed, like part-time staff becoming whole, the ability to like join those staff members together in a new setting, and really being able to provide everything that students need in one setting. Right now, with smaller population schools, there's less of a need for those full-time people, less of a need for those full-time spaces. And in the end, we're retrofitting buildings that were not built for the current student. I love the South School. I think it's a really wonderful place to learn, and it has a ton to offer, but the facilities themselves, and I think I see a lot of South parents out there and other people who know the South School, the facilities are lacking. It is an older building. It is, in a lot of ways, it's past its prime, and there's not a lot to do that can fix it to support students and the things that they need now to learn effectively. And I think the staffs at both of our buildings do an unbelievable job at meeting all of those students' needs, but it's not in the type of facilities that are available with 21st century learning and new building and new kind of construction and renovation. So, in terms of positions, I think we actually were looking at the potential for potentially needing more people, not less. We kept into account the class size that Stoughton has become very accustomed to, that small class size, and that was a huge factor in consideration when we wrote those plans and designed the number of classrooms and the need in this new building. So, I mean, you can ask the design team. We pushed pretty hard when it came to those things. The district personnel pushed pretty hard when it came to those things. To ensure the best possible outcomes for students in either the small school project or the larger project.
One more here. We'll get to the questions from the people at home too, but go ahead.
Hi, I'm Carolyn Campbell. Thank you. A couple of questions and a couple of comments. First of all, I support the consolidation idea. I think it's going to be more cost effective for the town in the long run. It's difficult to ask the town to pay for we're going to have to ask for middle school, then to ask for another elementary school, and we could combine the two. I think it's appropriate, and I'm in support of that. I understand there's been people that have spoken about the concern of going to a school with 500 students. I also went to Stoughton schools, and
Did you press the button accidentally?
Hello, now it's working. Now it's okay.
Little technical problem. Thank you for your patience. Those of us Zoom meetings are used to voices coming in and out sometimes.
Hello? All right, let's see if this works. All right. I grew up in Stoughton as well and attended Stoughton schools. I went to the Chemung Hill School for a couple of years, and then when the Gibbons School was built, I was redistricted into the Gibbons School District. The Gibbons School at that time was grades K through 6, and it probably had well over 500 students, if not up to 600 students, given they had 3 or 4 classes per each grade level, and the class numbers were much higher than what they are now. I don't remember the exact amount, but I'm sure it was larger than what is proposed for the new South School. Also, I understand there's been a lot of talk about neighborhood school districts. I think whether or not you have 4 schools or 5 schools, at the time we used to have 6 schools, and we redistricted and closed to 5 schools and moved about 20 years ago. And closed the Jones School and made the Jones a preschool early childhood center, which meant we had to redistrict students. And the school survived, and they're now, I don't think anyone's complaining that, there was a loss of a neighborhood school feeling when we went from 6 elementary schools to 5 elementary schools. I also think going from 5 to 4, there's not necessarily going to be that same loss. I think a lot of people will, parents that are going to get involved are going to get involved whether or not they have to drive 1 mile or 2 miles. The way the schools will be set geographically around the town, they're all relatively close. And my daughter wound up going out of district to the elementary school from the Gibbons to the Daw. And even though I had to drive across town, I was still involved, and it was actually a better experience for her than it was at the Gibbons. I do have a couple of questions and concerns. First, I guess the question is, was there any ever discussion of putting a preschool wing down at the new South School building?
There wasn't consideration of adding preschool because of the notion of having a centralized preschool for the entire town, as being a use for either at the Jones or if it became consolidated at the Wilkins.
Well, I'm still saying it could still be consolidated. It could just be consolidated in a wing off of this school down at the new South School, especially where there's the land. As the Jones School is not in great shape, and I think repurposing the Wilkins School for a preschool would be short-sighted. We all know that we are going to have a new middle school. I think given, a lot of the considerations that went into where we located the new high school will apply to the new middle school, and they'll want it in this area. So I think tying up the Wilkins School building for a preschool before we've made a decision on what to do with the middle school would be short-sighted. But
did you slide the button accidentally? No?
Nope.
Still green? I could repeat the question for the folks at home, or the issue about should the Wilkins or should the South have considered preschool, and maybe locating it at the Wilkins is short-sighted or premature at this point.
yes, thank you. That would be my concern. I'd like to see them consider a consolidated preschool at the South, since there's the space there on the site. And I think before moving any preschool into the Wilkins School, there needs to be a decision about what's going to do with the middle school. I mean, we all know that is going to that's the next project to be replaced. And the middle school, I think, geographically would need to be on the plot of land that is generally this whole complex. So that's why I think those decisions should be taken into consideration before we decide to move a preschool over to the Wilkins School. Thank you.
Thank you. As we mentioned, there is a need for the school committee and the town to think about what happens with a number of properties here, including the South School. If a new one is built on the Line Lumber site, then the current South School property does become available for repurposing. Jeff, I know you had some questions from home. Oh, one more in the room. I'm sorry. Go ahead. You can stand where you are. It's okay.
Good evening. My name is Ed DeFelice, and I'd like to say hello to my friend, TJ. And as TJ has mentioned, I've always been concerned with costs. And I can't believe that we're having this discussion and even nothing was on the flyer. And certainly that was a very good flyer. It was very informative. But there was nothing there to talk about costs, how we're going to deal with it. Since then, TJ, I became a senior citizen now, and retired. So now I know what the meaning of living on a fixed income is. However, you got to realize we've got a lot of things going on. I mean, we're still paying for the library, paying for this school. We got a fire station going up. There's talk here of other schools. I think the police department has been looking for something. So the problem is, it's just like, it looks like a no-win situation where every couple of years, the taxpayers are going to be asked to do an override. Someone has told me, I don't know if this figure is correct, but someone has told me that the average real estate tax for residents in Stoughton is like $6,000. I don't know if that's how accurate that is. That's what I was told. So my concern is that we just can't keep. They can do it in Washington because they print money. Unfortunately, we can't print money. But to just keep looking over our shoulders, it's like, you know what I mean? It's just they're all so expensive and they're all coming so soon. Why can't we maybe, just as a suggestion, a couple of things. Why can't we, I think the South School does have to be replaced. As I recall, that was supposed to be done before this building, but things changed. So it is, it was bad. It was in bad shape then, so I can imagine what it's like now. So my theory is that you would build a new South School, and all the other schools would remain pretty much where they are, and you would add a wing or an addition to them. Each one would have its own addition. And previous speakers mentioned about 3 stories. I don't see that as a good look for an elementary school. But what do you think of doing something like that? And if you did that, then we could probably ease the burden, and you'd have something smaller happening over X years, so it'd be a little less intimidating. You think something like that could work?
Well, the school committee did think about, a master plan, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, following on our assisting with a townwide master plan. And they're the ones who identified kind of the order of need. And the high school was first, and then South School, then the middle school.
As I recall, I went to a lot of those meetings. I believe, and I still believe, it was the South was the more desperate school. This school was going to be second, but it's got to be reversed. I mean, for whatever reasons, it doesn't matter. But
to get to your question about the possibilities, it is kind of the difference between, what the cost is now, as Catherine explained, that this project might take care of 2 of your needy schools in the sense of replacing the South and addressing the Wilkins school, as opposed to doing one now, granted at a lower cost, but then having to do something else in the future, which the projection is that would be more than the cost of one larger project now. Granted, it's a bigger hit now, that's understood, but it's less expensive. It seems pretty certain in the long run.
yeah, I understand, and that's probably correct.
Yeah.
However, I think it's a little easier on the taxpayer to have a small bump another small bump, another small bump.
Yeah.
I mean, if that fact is correct, that the average taxpayer is paying $6,000 in taxes, that's a hell of a lot of money. And we're going to start adding all these other overrides, I guess. I don't know how else you're going to do it.
I just want to address a little bit of the facilities master plan that Ms. Husseini and others put together a few years ago. It does lay out the order of schools, and it does propose for some of our younger schools. At this point, all of our schools are 50 years or older. It was really great that we had this building boom about 50, 75 years ago, but they are all over 50 years. For the Daw and the Gibbons, it would make sense to do an addition and a renovation to those schools. However, the Wilkins has no space for an addition. The design team actually looked at that as part of this process. Could we do an addition renovation for the Wilkins to add in this additional student population? And it's just not feasible because of the site on that. So I just wanted to touch on that. And I think TJ has some comments about cost.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Eddie, stay up there. Be more comfortable if I can.
Okay. If you insist.
Never mind. So I wanted to come up here because I knew that's why you were here. And by the way, Mrs. Levitz, the first person to ask a question was my 7th grade teacher. And of course, Ms. Walsh, I served on the Board of Selectmen. It's old home night. Having said that, we met very early on with the new town manager, Tim Bonfatti, and I, and we said, look, makes no sense for us to go through this year-long process of feasibility study unless we have some sort of financial plan to pay for it. It's a waste of money. The town appropriated at that time $750,000 for feasibility study. We needed to appropriate more because we were shy on the estimate. Made no sense to spend that money studying something that in the end the town couldn't pay for. And everything we do, every decision we've made on the building committee has been within that prism. You can ask David Lurie. He showed up at several meetings, and we've had a number of discussions with him. He's watching us, and I invite that, frankly, because I live in the town too, Eddie. I also wanted to point out that this, Tim will tell you this too, you made the same arguments for the high school, valid arguments. Senior citizens, how do they pay for it? They don't have kids in the school anymore. They don't really get a benefit out of it. I think you heard Mr. Dorr, Jake Dorr, mention, or if he didn't mention it tonight, he certainly mentioned it any number of times, that these have to be community buildings that we can get more use out of rather than 200 days or 180-something days a year for, in our case, 500 and some odd students. But for this building, you might recall, we did a really substantial outreach to seniors in this community. We put out flyers. We bought full-page ads. We had a seminar at the Council on the Aging, at the Senior Center, where we were laying out all of the tax relief programs that both the state or locally are administered through the assessor's office that are available to people, because it makes no sense to burden the community with something that they can't afford. It makes no sense for us to propose something that we can't pay for. So having said that, I knew you were going to ask it because I share the same concern. Someday I'll be your age, I hope. But having said that, we're watching it. And Eddie, please call me if I can ever answer anything. And for those at home, his question was, how do we pay for this, essentially? Am I right? But also, you asked about, can we replace the South School and then do one-for-one replacement? When we started this, there was just a statement of interest submitted to MSBA just for South School replacement. That changed, and actually the MSBA told us to study both, one-for-one replacement as well as consolidation with the Wilkins and this. And then, as Carl pointed out, the average over the last 4 years that they studied, the average K-5 school in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts that the MSBA has administered grants for is about 600 students. Ours will be around 525, 515. So our school, even though it's larger than we have now, it will still be less than the average school that the MSBA is funding now. And there's no way we're building a school but through the MSBA. This school is a bargain compared to what Sharon's paying for its school right now. Pardon me for those in Sharon who might be watching, but we beat you to the punch. We built ours first. The cost of construction will not allow us to replace one school at a time. All we can do is take the site, a very nice site, a very flexible site, and Carl will tell you on the high school, I had any number of questions. Tailor that school to your concerns. Do we want it to be community-based? Do we want it to have a neighborhood feel? Do we want to give it a woodsy feel because the South School is a school tucked into the woods? Do we want to do those things? All these wonderful design concerns, we can do that with this larger school. 3 stories, sure. We can landscape it so that that's, granted you're in the building if you're a kid and you're traveling up 3 floors, but that will be a community in itself. So everything's changed since I went to school and Mrs. Levitz was my teacher. Nowadays, there are cars. I just asked at our committee, how many cars are stacked up at each school every day to drop off kids and pick up kids? About 100, I heard. I rode my bike to school. That was my neighborhood school. Nowadays, parents drop their kids off in their car. They pick their kids up in their car, and I suspect they'll do the same now. Education's changed since you were a student, certainly since I was. All we can do is take your concerns, incorporate them into design, and find a way to pay for it.
Probably my last question. When do you anticipate we'll be back here talking about the O'Donnell Middle School? I guess my concern is...
No, and it's a good concern. The question for those at home was, when are we going to be back asking for a new middle school? If I can summarize your question. First of all, has to go through the same process, has to go through a year-long feasibility study, whether or not it can be an addition renovation, whether it needs to be a replacement, have to look at the site, whether or not that's an appropriate site. I can't tell you when it'll be brought up. That's for the school committee to decide. I know it's next up on the list.
Do we have, does the school committee have any kind of like a 5-year plan, 10-year plan, where you would be stretching things out so the impact is, lessened instead of being hit all at once or in a couple of 3 years? And I think the same for the town side. These things should be planned with some space between them.
So it will, by its very nature, it will be spread out. So while we're doing this project, it'll be a 5-year process to build. And then, of course, I can tell you the MSBA isn't going to approve something or invite us into the program if this town isn't going to approve it or can pay for it either. So none of these things are done in a vacuum. I don't know if, Catherine, you had anything to add on timing, but it's next up. I can't say it's next up right after. Joyce?
I apologize. I was discussing some other things there, but tell me if I'm going off track. There's a couple of items here. One is that Stoughton has historically, or I just said the MSBA historically doesn't like to see a statement of interest on a school until we're done with or near completion on another school. So knowing that we're 4 years out on this one, and that by the time you put in your statement of interest or accept it in, you're probably another 6 or 7 years out. It'll be 10 years before, I would guess, to speculate, before you see a middle school. In regards to the facility master plan, if that was part of your question?
Well, I just wondered if you had such a plan, then we could anticipate like maybe every 5 or maybe 10 years that we'd be spending a big chunk of money. Because it all comes down, to the taxpayer.
Yes.
We get, to be honest, we're getting killed right now with taxes because we've had to fund all these buildings. We're in the middle of doing a fire station, which we've needed probably for 30 or 40 years. But the impact on, I think you just have to consider the impact on the average taxpayer when you do these buildings. And maybe there should be just Spartan. When you add all these fancy things, bells and whistles, that drives the price up, obviously. So maybe what we have to do is, if you're going to be going after all these various schools, maybe we just have to do like Brockton did, have them a cookie cutter type school, elementary schools, and, maybe eliminate the bells and the whistles, because, the people are the ones that are paying for all this. Everything looks beautiful on paper until you see the price tag.
So I'm going to go back to your first comment about like the facility master plan and what it took into consideration. We considered that schools would be no more frequently than every 7 years. And honestly, that's very, very optimistic. I think that we're really looking at a 10-year plan. Part of the reason that we looked at that and looked at consolidating and eventually consolidating 5 elementaries down to 3 had to do with a lot of the other costs that you might look at in a building like this and consider bells and whistles. But, a lot of the things like the energy code today is so strict. So what the features that were in this building are code. So it's not like we're adding things to it, but the savings are tremendous. I look at a school like the Wilkins or the Jones that are still steam plants. It cost $1.38 a square foot to heat the Jones. It's the most expensive building to heat in the entire district. This building in comparison costs 19 cents a square foot. That's just due to code. Mm-hmm. And code has changed since this building was built. And we've got some opportunities coming up that will cost nothing. and I'm going to throw that out there as we're looking at the Wilkins and talking about repurposing it. Yes, it's an older building. Yes, it's kind of landlocked. But it has a new roof. It has new windows. It has new restrooms. It is structurally decently sound, but it's a steam plant. And so you're saying, why would we put people there? We have an energy consultant for the town that Ms. Brutinetti can confirm is doing amazing work for us. And she has hooked up the utility company to do a feasibility study for the electrification of the building. If that goes through to a project, that's a federal grant. So we are looking at every opportunity to take our buildings to the next level. And we would look at a building like the Wilkins where we still have structure, integrity left in it, but where it's prohibitively expensive to operate. And maybe we can get another 20 years out of it, whether it's preschool, whether it's swing space as we shift programs and do other our population changes. I think that we've got some opportunities ahead of us. Ideally, if we got ourselves down to a couple less elementary schools, our building cycle going forward for the next generation, we're not going to benefit from it, but the next generations aren't going to be looking at replacing buildings as often.
Well, thank you very much for your time, and I appreciate the transparency that you folks are providing, because in the past, some of that, I guess, wasn't available. But this is good, and the flyer you sent out was good. Thank you.
Thanks for coming out.
You want to do the home people? Good, do the home people. I have a tendency to make a short story long, so.
You want to read those to the mic there?
Thank you. We have some questions from our viewers at home via Zoom. A couple questions I'll combine about the site. Our viewers wanted to know where exactly on Park Street the Line Lumber or Fano Drive site was. And then a second question we received was, will there be any access to the site from Sumner Street, which would be behind the current site?
The Line Lumber site is a little bit hard to identify as you're driving down south on Park Street from the center of town, but maybe the most prominent landmark is that there's a billboard there, and there is a curb cut now that's gated off. I forget the name of the business across the street that's currently there. That might also give you a clue as to where it is. But it is a wooded site. There are no houses or any businesses or anything on Park Street at that location now. And it's before you get to, is it Ash Street, which takes you to the current South School. So it's north of the current South School. And in terms of access, right now, the primary access and egress would be from Park Street. We are investigating, having a second egress for emergency that might connect to Sumner. But that's not seen as a primary access point. Thank you.
It's across from 630 Park Street. Thank you, Ms. Walsh. And another question we received was, other than redistricting, has any analysis been done about child development, health, socialization, safety, as it relates to the two options, the larger school versus the single school model?
We have principals here. We have someone from the school committee. There's been a lot of educational thought put into the grade structure and configuration.
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, the document that we were required to write went through pretty much all of those that were covered. It talks about the way the classrooms would be designed, the K-12 education. We have to kind of go through what the current state is of both of our buildings and then what the preferred state would be in a new building. Or in either version of a new building. The plan can actually be adapted for every size option, whether it's a single school replacement or a redistricting option. The plan is for the idealized learning environment for students in Stoughton. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and I think it's also important to note that when we wrote the document, we took feedback and information from many different stakeholders and people that have different expertise within the district already. So some of those different ideas about that social emotional piece and how well the students would adapt and all of that, that was all taken into consideration when we wrote it and addressed many of the different things that went into the education plan. So in short, to answer the question, yes, those things were all part of the consideration and the authoring of the educational plan.
And I think between those considerations and then just what building code is now, which we learned a little bit about throughout this process, a lot of these things are taken into consideration with new builds, like particularly like safety. Like the current standards are just so high that they're automatically incorporated into our plan.
Anything else, Jeff? We're good? Okay. There's one more in the room here.
That's fine. My name's Peter Banis, Precinct 2 Town Meeting Rep. I was on the school committee in the late 90s when we were wondering when we were going to do something about the South School. And that was in the late 90s, right? And we did start off with 3 ADA projects. The ADA projects were the library, the West School, and the South School. And the West School, the Jones School, excuse me, not the South School, and the library. And we go back to the history of Stoughton. We've heard some people talking about history and TJ. I lived there my whole life too, okay? In the 60s, the land was given to the schools. And as we know, unfortunately, during COVID, we never had presentations like this about the fire station. And I'm not supposed to bring that up again, I guess, but the land that was given, I talked to the previous chiefs, David Jordan, there was all these plans that maybe something could have happened. And we've sat on our hands forever and ever and ever. The downtown has always been an issue. All the streets coming in, what do you do? Okay? I commend the presentation. I commend the people that are on school committee that give their volunteer time. TJ, you gave volunteer time and it's the politics of Stoughton just continues. This presentation, when you look at the pros and the cons, and I jotted down when Carl said, the cost of the options, it's the same order of magnitude. So I think you looked at all the issues, and of course the original pros, lower cost of the smaller building, minimize redistricting, and we keep the neighborhood schools. But the presentation that you made, and this is now 2023, the principals were involved. That's how you run business. You get input from people, you take what their opinions are, and you go forth. Ed DeFelice also said about the tax. I'm a senior citizen. The taxpayer and the cost of the taxes, we've prided ourselves on never having an override. Well, obviously, something's going to happen soon, and it's one of the things. We know that the socioeconomic condition of the town has improved. We know that we have a diverse population, and all those issues add into all these factors. So I just wanted to commend the people for this presentation. Thank you very much for having this open forum. And it is unfortunate that we didn't have that for the previous fire station job, which I worked real hard trying to do the right thing. but we're on with that. And as Lou Gito told me, it's a done deal, and that's why I fought so hard about that, okay? It is a done deal, and if anyone thinks it was a good decision, that's fine. I think it was not a good decision. And I'll use my final line. I used this during about the 14, 15 months that I presented to all the different boards, tried to present why maybe we should reconsider something else, okay? We don't have any use for 850 Park was the line by one of the select board people, okay? So now we have the fire station where it's going, and all I'm saying is Stoughton politics is like oldies 103. The hits just keep on coming.
Thank you, Peter. Another question from home?
We have another question from our Zoom viewers. Why does it take so long to build new schools, and will redistricting help build more new elementary schools?
Well, there's a couple parts to that. As Joyce mentioned, I think it was that, the process starts with first, Stoughton locally just identifying what its needs are, and then submitting a statement of interest to the state school building authority, who gets hundreds, at least over 100 statements of interest every year. They can only fund about 15 or 20 projects a year. So it takes a few years to get through their cycle and actually get accepted into the pipeline. So that's part of the reason there. And then once you are in the pipeline, the state does have a pretty rigorous procedure to make sure that the projects are done kind of conscientiously, comprehensively, that all options are looked at, and that basically smart decisions are made. So that takes some time too. Speed is not the goal in this, but getting it right is the goal. So that's why it may seem to take a bit longer. But I can tell you our firm specializes in designing schools in New England. We do work in other states, particularly in Connecticut, and Massachusetts is a model that the other states would love to duplicate. So the process is very well run in Massachusetts. It does take a bit longer, and unfortunately, but I think it gets it right in the end. I guess we're good. We'll stick around. Peter, thank you for your compliments, and we'll try to continue to be
I just want to tell the public, okay, my discussion about about the fire station. We now have some leadership in town. We have a new superintendent. We have a new town manager that actually are being transparent. They're going to get this done. They're going to do the right thing for the taxpayer, and they're going to do the right thing for the town. And I think the future looks good. It is going to cost a lot of money, like Ed said. It's got to be done. We have no choice. So Tom Coulter and Joe Baeta, go for it, guys.
Thank you, Peter. An endorsement for more transparency. And I guess we're good. Thank you all for coming out again on a nice summer night. We appreciate it, and we will continue to have community forums as we move forward with this process, including every building committee and every school committee meeting is an open town meeting, is an open meeting rather for public input, and the next one is next week for the school committee. Thanks very much.